Can trout see in dirty water? Yes, they absolutely can. If fish couldn't see in dirty water, they'd starve. Dirty water doesn't mean you can't go fishing. In some ways, dirty water is the easiest water to fish. You can get away with a lot of things in dirty water that you can't get away with in clean water. If you understand what's happening and how the trout are reacting, fishing in dirty water can be some of the best days to go fishing. I love fishing in dirty water because nobody else wants to fish it. Everybody thinks that dirty water means tough conditions with fewer fish in the net. They think that you have to use big giant streamers and you have to fish absurdly bright colors or just use black flies. They think that dirty water means that the trout can't see your fly. Well, they're wrong. Trout don't go on a hunger strike just because the water gets dirty. Quite the opposite. Dirty water can often be the result of an increase in flows. And that increase in flows means more food items are being washed into the river. To the trout, this is a food bonanza. So let's talk about what makes our rivers dirty and what it means for how trout see. We told you in episode 2 that the rivers we fish contain other particles that can increase attenuation of the light and color. When we're talking about a river being dirty or having reduced visibility, we may not realize it, but we're still talking about light, color, and attenuation. Some of the particles we find in rivers may absorb blue and violet light. Others might absorb green, orange, or red light, making the attenuation diagram look very different. When light waves are attenuated, we not only lose colors, it also reduces the overall intensity, making it darker under the surface of the water. Think of it like this. We have a stage and 6 spotlights representing the colors of the spectrum. If all 6 lights are on, we get a nice bright white spotlight on the stage. If we lose the blue and violet lights, the spotlight is not as bright and the color changes. If we then lose the red and orange lights, the color changes again and the spotlight is even dimmer. The more heavily colored the water is, the more particles it has in it. In other words, the dirtier it is. So we have lots of particles attenuating the light and color. These same particles, along with other larger particles, are what normally reduce visibility or clarity. The greater the number of particles, the greater the attenuation, meaning a greater reduction in the intensity of light as well as the clarity. This reduced clarity confuses a lot of anglers. When we look into the water and can see only maybe 10 inches under the surface because of all the attenuation, we frequently make the mistake of thinking that the trout can only see a few inches, or that past 10 inches there's no visibility. But that's not what's really happening under the water. We learned in episodes 1 and 2 that we need reflected light to perceive an object. If we look into the water and can't see the object if it is more than 10 inches under the surface, we need to remember that the light has to travel into the water, down to the object, be reflected, and then travel back up to the surface of the water and still have enough energy to reach our eyes. So the light has traveled more than twice the distance of the submerged object that we're looking at under the water. But if the light had not been reflected off the surface of the object, it would have continued to travel further down into the water. Just because we can't see more than 10 inches into the water doesn't mean that the trout's world has zero visibility or is completely dark past that 10 inches. The light continues to travel into the water, illuminating the trout's world. But because the light is being attenuated, the trout's world will be the color of the reflected light waves. The water that the trout is looking through will be a specific color and will become more monochromatic and darker shades of that color as the water gets deeper. How much further beyond our limit of visibility does the light travel in dirty water? There are some very complex algorithms for determining this, but we're not doing complex math on the river. We need a simpler way to look at this. We need river math. I spoke to some people who do underwater photography, figuring they must have a pretty good understanding of light and color in water. They told me that in general, under the best conditions, visibility in most rivers is usually about 10 feet. In dirty water, they find that light extends about 3 to 4 times further than the visibility. So if we can see 10 inches into the water, there might still be some light at a depth of 30 to 40 inches. But at this point, the light is fading and everything becomes a much more uniform color. The question then is, how do trout see in dirty water? And the answer is, trout see better than we think they do in dirty water. Not because they have some special type of vision for dirty water, but because they adapt to their surroundings. If the clarity is, say, 12 inches, this means that there may still be quite a bit of light at 36 inches. So in any water less than 3 feet deep, we can expect that there is still enough light for the trout to see. Fishing below this depth can often be a fool's errand because the trout probably won't be at that depth because they can't see with no light. But trout can see at night, so they should be able to see in the dark water, right? We'll explore this more in the last and final episode of the How Trout See installment. But for now, remember episode 1? Both we and the trout use our rods instead of our cones to see in the dark conditions. The trout can't switch between rods and cones like we do. For trout, it's a very gradual process that takes a long time. If a trout were to switch to only using rods because it was dark at the bottom of the river, it wouldn't be able to easily move throughout the water column in search of food because the rods would be overstimulated. Rods are about 1,000 times more sensitive to light than cones. There would be too much light and the trout would be pretty much blind, just like when you leave a dark movie theater and walk into bright sunlight. When the water is dark or dirty, the trout adapt to their surroundings by holding higher in the water column or in shallower water, where there is more light so they can more easily find food. They also feel safer because the attenuation means that they can't see predators like osprey or fly anglers above the surface as easily. If we go back to our example of the visibility being 12 inches, for example, you'll most likely find the trout holding somewhere between 12 and 36 inches, where they feel safe and have enough light to see. There's been so much talk about Euro-nymphing or tight-lining in the last few years, and they've told you that your flies need to be just off the bottom because that's where the trout are. There may be some truth to this in clear water, but in dirtier and darker water, the rules change. If there's enough light on the bottom to see in dirty water, they might be on the bottom. But if the light can't penetrate all the way to the bottom, they'll be higher in the water column. When the volume of water increases, we usually see an increase in not only the depth of the water, but the flow, or the speed that the water is moving. Trout don't mind if the water is deeper. They can easily adjust to that. What they do mind is if the flow is significantly higher. This makes their life harder for 2 reasons. First, heavy or fast current wastes a trout's energy. Trout don't want to sit in heavy current wasting energy. They want to find areas where they can be protected from the current and expend as little energy as possible. Second, if the visibility is reduced, trout can't detect food from very far away. In our example of visibility being 12 inches and the light waves reaching depths of 36 inches, this means that a trout may be able to detect an item that might be food somewhere maybe around 36 inches. But If the trout is in water that is flowing at 6 feet per second, the trout will only have half a second to decide if it's food or not and to act upon that decision. This is obviously not practical. So trout will seek out certain types of water when the water is at higher flows and dirtier. They will be looking for water that has enough light to see, but enough depth to feel safe, and slow enough current to preserve energy and allow them more time to make a decision on whether or not an item is food. Once we realize this, we can then do 3 things to start to adapt our tactics. First, we need to look for sections of the river with this type of water. Eddies, side channels, water along the banks, or deep pools, anywhere where the current slows down. Second, since we are nymphing in slow water, I like to use an indicator, and I always use the smallest, lightest indicator that I can for the best sensitivity. Third, because we can't see into the water and don't know what the depth is, we need to flip our usual way of thinking about how deep we fish the nymphs. Normally, we place the nymphs 1.5 times the depth of the water below the indicator. In dirty water, we need to observe the visibility and start at 1.5 times the visibility. So if the visibility is 12 inches, I start with my flies 18 inches underneath the indicator. If I'm not getting strikes, I'll move the indicator up 6 inches at a time, fishing gradually deeper until I'm getting strikes or hanging up on the bottom. What about fly size? What size fly can trout see in dirty water? In the clips in the beginning of this video, the visibility is about 8 inches, and the trout were taking a size 20 fly fished about 12 to 24 inches under my indicator. Yes, I said a size 20. And look at the fly that he found. Thank you, little man. A little blue spring midge. And he found that in this. So, just how dirty is this water? And they still find the tiny flies. You don't have to fish absurdly large or bright flies to catch trout in dirty water. They can see much better than most people realize in dirty water. And I'm not saying that larger flies like streamers don't work in dirty water. They do work, and they can be extremely effective, often more effective in dirty water than in clear water. Trout can see larger flies better than smaller flies. Just because the trout can see the fly better doesn't mean that they're going to take the fly. Larger flies in dirty water can sometimes catch very large fish. This goes back to the trout feeling safer in dirty water. Some of the larger fish that have reached the point where they primarily feed at night on larger prey might come out to feed in dirty water during the daytime. So sometimes dirty water is a shot at a trout that you might not get a shot at otherwise. I have found that in extreme cases, when visibility is less than 3 inches, when we get water that we might call muddy water, larger flies or junk flies like mop flies, bunny leeches, and egg patterns and streamers do seem to be more effective. When it comes to fishing dirty water and looking for water that trout prefer in these conditions, some of it may come down to timing. Trout don't like change. They adapt to change quite well, but they don't like change. It makes them moody, and the more sudden the change, the more moody they get. High dirty water is usually the result of things like snowmelt and runoff, rainstorms, or even a dam release. Events like this can quickly raise the water level as well as massively increase the flows in the river. Trout don't like this. Food bonanza or no, trout are looking for safe places to get out of the raging current. In some of the rivers I fish, during runoff, there are things like tree branches and logs coming down the river. Oftentimes, I can hear rocks rolling down the riverbed. Things like this can give the trout lockjaw. And in conditions like this, I'm more likely to hook a tree branch than a trout. While it's possible to fish in these conditions by targeting slower water along the banks, I personally wait for the flows to peak before heading to the river. A lot of this may come down to the river you're fishing. If it's a big, wide river with a lot of eddies or pockets where the water slows down, it might be great. The trout will likely all pile into these spots to get out of the current, making fishing easier. But a narrow mountain stream may be blown out with high, fast water from bank to bank, and the trout focused more on surviving than eating. Waiting until the flows drop and expose areas of slower water will probably be your best bet. I know that many of you are wondering if other materials like UV materials, fluorescent materials, flash, and tinsel can help in these conditions. Sometimes they can. We'll have a video coming out soon where we talk specifically about these often misunderstood materials, how they work, and how they allow us to not necessarily break the rules we've learned about light and attenuation, but maybe bend them a little bit. We know that most fly anglers only get a handful of days on the river each year and can't always choose to fish on the best days. If you find yourself on the river facing dirty water, be sure and smile and wave to those that are leaving because there's dirty water. You know that the fish can see just fine in most dirty water, and you know that you can make changes to where and how you fish and still have a great day on the river. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.